Chapter 133 to 135. In the desert of the barren lands, a man lazily lay on a soft sofa. His two swords neglectedly rested on the floor beside him. Guy sure was very serious about this time's invasion. Maybe you should be too, Dino. He jumped from the sofa, grabbing his swords. He unsheathed them and took a stance, the sudden intruder catching him off guard. His eyes, which had been half-lidded moments ago, now opened wide, prepared for battle. Feldway, why are you here? Dino asked, still cautious, slowly lowering his swords. One of the original angels, a seraphim similar to himself, stood before him. What's more, it was the angel at the top of the hierarchy, or so some thought. I have something for you to do, Dino. Feldway walked toward him, his eyes stern as he knew the personality of the fallen. You and the other two will be doing something for me. Dino recalled Gracia and Pico, who were still out in the cardinal world, observing things incognito. He was supposed to be one of them as well, but he mostly did his work, lounging around in Dagruel's territory. As the giant and fallen were friends, he was lucky enough to get refuge and live for thousands of years for free in the giant's city. And why should we do anything for you? Dino reverted to his lazy personality, sheathing the two swords now attached to his waist. Aren't you supposed to be watching? Dino, Feldway interrupted, his expression dark. We found a way to revive Veldanava-sama. Dino's expression shifted to one of displeasure. The ambiance of the room grew tense. His eyes glared at the seraphim before him, his mana flaring in the room. Don't joke with me, Feldway. Feldway crossed his arms, unperturbed by the shift in mood. Do you really think I would joke about something like this, Dino? Gritting his teeth, Dino continued to process Feldway's words repeatedly in his mind. The thought of their creator's revival, the possibilities, the implications, and whether it was even right to force it. He had always thought of waiting for Veldanava to show himself again in the future. He was waiting, unlike Feldway, who thought they were abandoned. Dino believed that Veldanava simply needed time for his revival. He respected his creator's wishes and chose to guard his daughter while waiting. But what if it's real? What if Feldway truly has found a way to revive Veldanava? What do I need to do? Feldway nodded, acknowledging Dino's cooperation. In a different room, a different conversation was unfolding. Dagruel was staring at his brother, someone who was supposed to be bound in the Tower of Heaven for his actions. Fen, how are you here? Hello too, brother. Fen, one of the demon lord Dagruel's brothers, stood before him with a smirk on his face. Feldway let you go, didn't he? The old giant sighed, seeing his brother free of his chains. Actually, the chains still existed, coiled around his arms, but they were more like weapons for him now than the things that had locked him in the Tower of Heaven. I miss you too, Fen didn't answer, his tone sarcastic. You used to be so cool back then, whatever happened to that big brother of ours? Dagruel frowned at the green-haired giant. That was before we were defeated by Veldanava-sama. Not to mention, weren't you almost beaten by Lei? Fen clicked his tongue, recalling the blonde seraph who had fought him when he went on a rampage. The fight had been close to a draw, with Fen ultimately coming out on top. Though the fact that the battle had even come close to a draw left a bitter feeling inside. When it became too dangerous for the angel, Veldanava had finally intervened and sealed Fen in the tower with the chains, Gleipnir. That woman, his tone darkened. Dagruel felt satisfaction in pushing Fen's buttons and scrambling whatever he was plotting. Whatever, I have something planned for her later. I don't think that's a good idea. Dagruel smiled wryly, seeing that Rimuru was attached to the angel and had even left this world with him to fight the cryptids. Cracking his knuckles, Fen lunged forward toward Dagruel. Enough talking, let's fight. Dagruel nodded. While he was much calmer now than in the past, he was still someone who enjoyed a good fight. With his fist clenched, he swung at Fen. Both of their fists made contact with each other's faces, sending both giants flying and slamming into the walls. The tower shook from the force. Dagruel stood up, wiping the dust from his body much like Fen, who was grinning. Looks like you didn't get any weaker. Same to you. Their battle continued as their fists slammed into each other's bodies. Fen ducked as Dagruel's fist barely missed his head, while simultaneously kicking the blue-haired giant in his side. While Fen had the advantage of being faster and more agile due to his lean body, Dagruel was built of pure, heavy muscle that could block and defend against almost any attack. Fen's kick barely made Dagruel groan as the giant grabbed Fen's leg and slammed him into the ground. With Fen lying on the floor, Dagruel looked at his brother with something similar to pity before raising both hands. This is over, Fen. As his hands swung downward, Fen raised both of his hands, and Gleipnir made its move. The chains, like living snakes, began to slither through Dagruel's arms, binding them together. With both of his arms suddenly chained, Dagruel couldn't react to Fen slamming his head into his in a brutal headbutt. Dagruel felt dizzy as Fen's soul began to interact with his own. He fell to his knees as his eyes closed from the sudden surge of pain in his head. You were right, it is over, brother. Fen wiped the blood from his lips as he saw Dagruel begin to open his eyes. Gone were the calm and almost gentle eyes of the Demon Lord Giant. His eyes were now filled with conviction and hidden wrath that could barely be contained. Fen grinned as he removed the chains. Dagruel stood up, holding his arms, which had previously been bound, and looked outside the tower. Welcome back. Hinata took a deep breath as she stood atop the wall separating the barren lands from the western nations. Behind her stood the elites of the Holy Knights, the captains, as well as their paladins, standing in formation, ready to lay down their lives against the forces looming to come. Luminos stood beside her. The vampire princess took her right hand's warning of the wave of invading giants to heart and had made sure to prepare hundreds of years before this day would come. It took me, you, Granbel, and Razul to take them out. Rimuru's warning in their previous chat had left Luminos overly cautious of the land god. And that is why you are here too, Granbel. Luminos smirked, seeing the blonde hero with his insectar friend looking over the horizon. Good to know that Rimuru smashed some sense into that brain of yours. Granbel glared at the female vampire. Just because I am here to protect humanity does not mean you and I are allies. I am only here to continue my purpose as a hero. Hinata couldn't help but wear a wry smile. She had heard that same line before, in the past timeline. Right before she was killed, and teleported far away into the past, Luminos and Granbel had formed a shaky alliance to preserve the humans they protected, albeit with differing reasons. Is it even possible to defeat the wicked land god? Granbel looked behind him to see the Holy Knights, the surmounters of the vampires, and even the illegally summoned other worlders he had control over, all present. The force was more than enough to take over the entire western nations by force in less than a week. Yet, he couldn't see them all defeating the giants that had been battling at the walls through skirmishes. The only reason they had even managed to maintain the wall was because the giants, and Demon Lord Dagruel, did not take the invasion seriously and only engaged in small-scale assaults. There were times when desperate giants left Darmagen, disobeying Dagruel's orders to finally break free from the barren lands. Even just those runaway giants had dealt a heavy blow to the walls a century ago. Granbel couldn't even imagine if the official army of the giants had been the ones invading that day. This time, he frowned as a cloud of dust rose high into the sky. The sand of the barren lands flew into the air as a large stampede dashed past them. They are here, Razul, Granbel's friend, finally spoke, a sharp glint in his eyes as he observed the walking bipedal behemoths approaching to destroy the wall. Everyone, get into position. Hinata barked orders. The Holy Knights saluted before preparing their magic. The vampires also made their move as they stood atop the walls, forming the first, and hopefully final, line of defense. Not yet. The giants, with their own varying appearances, ran with their weapons held tightly. It was finally time for the promised land to be open to them. No, they were going to forcefully open it. After thousands of years in infertile land, they had done nothing but remain patient and persevere. Their king, Dagruel, had sworn that someday the lands they stood on would be fertile. Whether this promise meant the barren lands would flourish, or they would migrate to a new home, was left to their own interpretation. Dagruel was fine with that. As long as he could keep them in check and hopeful, the giant race would live on for a long time. Then, as he looked up into the sky, a few small dots could be seen, obscured by the rays of the sun. Thankfully, with magic sense, he could fully perceive the threats diving down at them. Golems. 5 golems landed in front of the long wall. Their appearance was strange, even for the already uncanny humanoid golems made by Demon Lord Kogli. These ones looked akin to insects, their limbs a fusion of flesh and machine. Their limbs were asymmetrical, some longer than others, seemingly taken from different insect species. The number of limbs on their bodies was unnaturally high, far more than the common golem, which typically had only 2 arms. The sight of the 5 golems was so surreal it took him some time to fully process the threat. Then, as if pulling him away from his thoughts, the ground began to move, and the land in front of the insect golems cracked open. The very front of the giant army began to fall into the large pit, as deep as 200 meters. The second wave of giants halted, but the majority were still pushed by the third and fourth, forcing a fraction of Dagruel's forces to quickly be captured and incapacitated. A simple yet effective plan, Granbell commented as he watched the giants continue to fall into the massive fissure in front of the wall. What are those golems though? I have never seen such an unusual golem variation. Hinata ordered the holy knights as they aimed the ballistic weapons placed on the walls. The large steel arrows with magisteel imbued on the tip were fired from the crossbow-like weapons, twice the size of a person. I had Rimuru bring a few here, she finally answered Granbell's query. It seems that Citadel is also very busy, so he only approved 5. But still, they are the most modern version and are Special A. Special A, those things, Granbell couldn't help but exclaim, pointing at them. As the giants stopped falling, down the crack in the ground, 3 of the insect golems jumped down into the pit, while the other 2 rushed forward into the center of the remaining army of giants. Don't fall behind, Hinata shouted, as ballistic arrows rained down on the giants, impaling their tough skin and lodging their bodies into the ground. Some unfortunate souls had their heads exploded from the speed of the steel arrows. This is harder than I thought. Dagruel frowned as his giant army was already losing about half its original numbers in just a few minutes since the battle began. While it was a large drop in numbers, the overall strength of the army barely changed. The ones who died easily were the weaker and newer ones in the army. The more experienced veterans were able to escape the pit before fully falling, and dodge or block the arrows showering the area. The giants sent retaliatory projectiles at them. Slamming their hands on the ground, they grabbed large rocks and hurled them at the walls, specifically targeting the holy knights firing ballistic weapons. Some giants who held spears began throwing them like javelins, damaging both the wall and the forces within it. Only using physical attacks, Glassard said, cutting an arrow flying toward him. The metal projectile fell in front of his feet. Demon Lord Luminos has prepared well for our inevitable invasion. Even with this resistance, they won't be able to defeat Elder Brother, Fen scoffed, as he threw a rock as large as a person's head, destroying another ballistic weapon atop the wall. Have the Hecatoncheires take care of those weird golems. We will advance forward with the Cyclops. Have the great ogres keep throwing rocks at them, the remaining greenhorns can join them in the back. Finishing his words, with a single step of his large frame, the tide of battle changed. Dagruel making his move was the signal for all the true powerhouses within the walls to move as well. Let's begin the plan. At Hinata's words, Luminos, Granbell, Rizul, and even Roy and Louise jumped from the top of the walls. Luminos and Granbell had been briefed by Hinata, who was put in charge of the entire operation due to her knowledge of the enemy. Granbell had his doubts about how Hinata was so knowledgeable regarding the giants' situation and numbers, but he kept them to himself. The plan was simple: never allow the 3 brothers to remain near each other during the battle. If possible, eliminate, at the very least, the green-haired giant, Fen. As the most aggressive of the trio, his death would soften the dangers. That said, it was almost impossible for them to defeat Dagruel. Even Hinata, who had lived for tens of thousands of years, knew she couldn't stand against the being known as Continent's Wrath. If she thought of anyone capable of defeating the giant, the answers would obviously be Citadel Rimuru, Citadel Velgrand, or Chloe, who was currently in El Dorado. Unfortunately, she had received a different order from someone. As they landed on the ground, they moved in unison toward their designated opponents. In front of Dagruel stood Hinata, Rizul, and Louise. Facing his brother Glassard in swordsmanship was the hero Granbell, while Luminos and Roy were up against the crazed giant Fen, the youngest of the trio. Dagruel nodded, almost approving their plan. I would have thought Luminos would join you in facing me. He stroked his chin as Luminos pushed back Fen, the battle moving farther east, away from the main battlefield and into a clear field. Hinata remained silent. She took a deep breath and readied her weapon. Having fought many beings over the span of millennia, she knew it was irrational to desire defeating Dagruel. While she could not pose much of a challenge in terms of victory or defeat, she believed herself to be the best choice to keep him busy and slow him down. Adding Rizul, an insectar, a race known for their tough exoskeletons, meant they could hold off the demon lord while the others dealt with his brothers. Rizul was the first to move, followed by Hinata. The insectar had been briefed by Hinata on their plan and formation for fighting the massive monster. He launched a swift kick at Dagruel's head. Dagruel easily blocked the strike and was about to counter when Hinata appeared behind him, aiming for his spine, forcing him to dodge as he sensed the danger. Hinata and Rizul stepped back as Dagruel looked at them with newfound amusement and excitement. Apologies. I thought this would be a boring battle. Turns out, I was mistaken. The continent's wrath cracked his knuckles and lunged forward at Razul. Luminos hadn't been happy with the plan when it was first presented to her. As the demon lord of the group, she had expected to participate in fighting a fellow demon lord. Yes, she understood she wasn't a good match for a true giant, given that magic nullification was one of their intrinsic abilities. But she could have at least acted as support for Hinata. She had the ability to revive people for a reason. Yet, even with that argument, Hinata shut it down and told her to focus on the rascal, the most malevolent of the brothers. You must be Luminos. Fen grinned, his fist inches from her face. Dagruel really had a hard time fighting a little girl like you. Luminos remained silent, not letting Fen feel the joy of his taunts working on her. Though in truth, they were, deeply. With Roy firing magic as a distraction, Luminos was more than able to go toe-to-toe with the chained giant. Her sword glowed brightly each time it made contact with Fen's fist. Each blow damaged the surroundings, shattered ground, cracked stone, a sign of their power and the level they stood at, near the top of the world's hierarchy. Luminous Valentine, the daughter of Twilight and the queen of the vampires. Fen, once part of the wicked god, and brother to the demon lord Dagruel. Their clash continued, each strike heavier than the last. Sparks flew, wind howled around them from the force of their blows. Quietly, Luminos drew on her newly awakened powers from Seal. I'll evolve your skills. You'll need this for the upcoming fight. She remembered the Seraph's words as her unique skill, Lust, evolved into the ultimate skill, Asmodeus, a power that controlled life and death, leaning more toward the life side. It was an ability similar to Testarosa's, though hers leaned toward death. Fen was getting angrier as the fight dragged on. Both he and Luminos were gaining new wounds with every strike they failed to block or dodge. But what really burned at him was how someone like her could cut through his skin. It didn't make sense. Every time her blade touched him, it wasn't just pain, it felt like his strength was draining from his body. For someone as proud as him, it was humiliating. A little farther away, Granbell was locked in a sword fight with the giant named Glassard. Both were skilled swordsmen and fought as such, each strike showing years of experience and precision. That damn woman actually boosted my abilities. Granbell muttered, gritting his teeth as he remembered Seal. He hated it, hated that even at his prime, he was only holding even with the giant. His pride stopped him from fully using the new power he had been given. If he did, he'd have the upper hand. But he couldn't bring himself to use it, not yet. Their swords clashed again and again, the sound of metal ringing across the battlefield. Granbell's ultimate skill, Sariel, was close in nature to Luminous's. Asmodeus, a power centered around life, it had allowed him to bring his body back to its prime state. Still, even with all that power, he couldn't stop one thought from creeping in. If only I could have brought back Maria. He knew it wasn't possible. But that didn't stop him from wishing it was. Finally taking the fight as seriously as he could, Granbell raised his blade. True slash. Glassard, sensing the impending danger, felt a cold shiver crawl down his spine. He poured everything he had into evading the blow. Just barely, the blade scraped across his side as he leapt away with a heavy grunt. The trail of destruction left by the attack carved deep into the battlefield, continuing behind him, cutting through terrain and decimating the giant army that had stood in formation. Life drain. Hinata muttered under her breath as she pierced through Dagruel's skin. A low, guttural groan escaped the giant's mouth as she swiftly withdrew and jumped back, dodging his swinging arm by inches. Razul rushed in without hesitation, taking advantage of the opening. He struck behind Dagruel's knee with precision, the hit causing the massive leg to buckle. Dagruel stumbled, just for a moment, but it was enough. Hinata pressed the attack, moving quickly, her slashes and thrusts hitting across Dagruel's upper body. An ability to weaken, Dagruel muttered, parrying one strike while bracing for another. No, it's different somehow. He narrowed his eyes, just in time to see Razul moving in from behind again. He noticed Razul sneaking from behind and, with a swift movement, Dagruel successfully landed a powerful blow to his body, sending him flying away. A powerful gust of wind followed the impact, rushing past Hinata's face as Razul was flung through the air by the force of the blow. She didn't flinch. No reaction crossed her face as her ally flew past. She stayed focused, unshaken, her eyes fixed on Dagruel's rising form in the distance. Her mission was clear. She had to stall him, wear him down. They needed more time to deal with the others. Fen, bloodied, coughed as he heaved. With Roy's death and Luminos bound by the chains Gleipnir, he felt himself close to passing out. Luminos' ability had nearly destroyed his very soul, draining the life from his very being. He looked around as Luminos continued trying to escape the chains. His eyes turned to his brother Glassard, who found himself in a stalemate with the hero Granbell. Even Dagruel, who had been fighting with a clear advantage against Hinata and the Insectar Razul, could sense that, for some reason, his very soul and magicules were slowly disappearing every time the Holy Night Woman managed to strike his flesh. Damn it, he cursed as he charged at Granbell, who barely managed to react. Glassard, to elder brother, hurry. Glassard, shocked to see Fen so heavily injured, nodded and grabbed him, carrying him toward Dagruel. Granbell hurriedly chased after them, his sword raised high as it began to glow. Melt slash. Seeing the attack coming as Fen was being carried, Glassard grabbed a nearby giant and tossed him into the path of the incoming strike. While the giant didn't manage to block the attack, becoming yet another victim, Glassard managed to dodge out of the way just before the blade could reach them. Seeing Dagruel a few dozen meters away, Glassard jumped as high as he could with all his strength. Grabbing Fen, he tossed him toward Dagruel before beginning to fall as well. Luminos, finally breaking free of the chains, ran toward Hinata. Hinata, above. Hinata, hearing the warning, looked up instinctively, just as Dagruel and Razul did. Unfortunately, Dagruel reacted first. He slammed Razul to the ground and sent Hinata flying with a powerful kick. Unseal. Power began to well up within Dagruel's body. Watching this, Hinata couldn't help but curse. They had failed to prevent the worst-case scenario. Trinity. A dazzling light surrounded Dagruel as Fen and Glassard joined him. We need to retreat. I'll contact Chloe, so. That won't be necessary. This voice. Seal, is that you? Hinata asked, confused by the sudden thought communication. Listen, Dagruel is already transforming, we need backup here. He is already on his way. Hinata repeated, unable to imagine Rimuru personally coming, especially at this stage of the war. Who is it? Then, as the light dispersed, a three-headed, six-armed giant born from the age of mythology unveiled himself. Now, let us finish this. Dagruel marched forward, each step sending small quakes through the surroundings, welcoming the return of the god of destruction, the being said to have only been defeated by Veldanava himself. Kuahahaha! A loud laugh echoed through the air as everyone looked up. The massive figure of a storm personified loomed high above them. Dagruel, it's been a while, hasn't it? Dagruel's eyes shifted upward, tracking the giant dragon as it slowly descended toward them, wings beating through the air with a powerful force. Veldora, I thought you died. Kuahahaha, my death is greatly exaggerated. With a sudden flap of his wings, Veldora landed with a heavy thud, shaking the earth beneath him. He transformed into his humanoid form, a confident grin plastered across his face. Without missing a beat, he pointed directly at Dagruel. How about we end our rivalry now? Dino sighed as he stood before the edge of the forest of Jura. Following Feldway's orders, he was about to attempt an assassination on one of his fellow ancient beings in the cardinal world. Are we really doing this, Dino? Asked Pico, a fellow seraph, a young girl with blonde hair. She turned toward him with a troubled expression. Do you think we can even take her out? Added another seraph, Gracia, gripping her weapon and shield. Not to mention, Rimuru and possibly the true dragon Velgrand are in there. Dino broke into a cold sweat. Don't say that, he muttered, scratching the back of his head. Feldway said he'll deal with both of them. Do you really believe in Feldway? Pico scoffed, just as a distant explosion rumbled through the air. The battle continued in both the sky and on the ground, but the three of them stood apart, silent observers on the outskirts of the war between the monsters and the Eastern Empire. This isn't like you two, Gracia said with a sigh. Do you really think this will help bring Veldanava-sama back? If it's even possible. Dino stepped toward the forest and looked back at them. I'd take the risk. Gracia and Pico looked at each other with confused expressions before silently following after him. You really are acting strange today, Pico said. Dino said nothing. Ramirez placed a hand on her cheek, observing the war currently happening. Normally, she wouldn't even think about interfering with the natural battles between nations in the world, as one also given a role by Veldanava. Ramirez-sama, I have returned as you ordered. Trainee bowed as she appeared from the ground via vines. Her appearance was the same as when she left for war, a testament to her capabilities during the battle, albeit she had consumed a considerable amount of magicule. Where are Rimuru and the others right now? The Spirit Queen asked as she stood before the labyrinth gate. Trainee followed behind her as they entered inside. Rimuru-sama and Velgrand-sama are in position to receive the real Forces of the Empire near the sea. Carrera-sama and Ultima-sama are out hunting more Imperial guards. Seal-sama said she was going somewhere, but unfortunately I couldn't tell where. Ramirez gestured for her to let it go. The two traveled to the deepest part of the labyrinth. With the new systems Rimuru had installed, based on several suggestions, she could observe the outside world even from her stronghold. Is something the matter, Ramirez-sama? Trainee could tell that Ramirez was watching things closely and being cautious for some reason. It worried her, and she remained alert even in the supposed safety of the labyrinth. Nothing much, Ramirez smiled as she grabbed a crystal orb showing an image of three beings. I just have a hunch about who their target is. As if on cue, the labyrinth began to shake. Trainee's expression turned to horror. It was absurd, only someone like a true dragon should be able to cause this level of damage to the labyrinth. Looking into the orb Ramirez had been focused on, the image showed the three fallen seraphs, their three pairs of wings out, entering the labyrinth. Oh no, Trainee backed away slightly. Ramirez-sama, let's escape for now. Ramirez giggled at how panicked Trainee was. You don't have to be that panicked, Trainee-chan. We also have our own backups. Trainee didn't know who she was talking about. Everyone on their level was currently out. The demonesses might arrive later, and Seal was still missing, but other than them, the rest were busy with their own battles. Calm down, Trainee. Seal appeared beside them. Trainee looked over at the sudden appearance of the blonde seraph. She was holding a strange type of key in her hand that disappeared a moment later. It took a while to convince Velgrin to pull those two out, but here they are. A gate began to appear behind the trio. The familiar structure brought a smile to the Spirit Queen's face. It has been a while, hasn't it? Two beings stepped out of the gate before it disappeared, a red-haired man and a blue-haired woman. The strength radiating from their bodies sent a shiver down Trainee's spine. At the same time, she felt a familiar presence. It was the feeling of a spirit, no, something stronger. Like a spirit lord, the highest known evolution of spirits. Yet somehow, these two were even stronger, reaching a level similar to Ramirez. Hello, Ramirez-sama. The blue-haired woman waved as she smiled. It's been about 2,000 years or so, Ramirez-sama, the red-haired man said with a quick bow. The two moved toward Ramirez with a sense of nostalgia, respect, and familiarity. Hello, Runa, Agni, Ramirez smiled. Thank you for coming to my rescue, even though you were busy. Don't mention it, Ramirez-sama. Agni, the red-haired man, laughed. Zejin was about to finish the fight anyway. That's true. Rimuru-sama was also reaching the end of his battle. Runa nodded as they looked into the orb. There, Gracia and Pico could be seen going deeper into the labyrinth, attacking the walls to weaken the structure further. Dino walked behind them, his expression slightly worried. Sometimes they stopped to argue or tried to push Dino to the front. Though he would be forced forward for a while, he always ended up at the back again without the other two noticing. So we're fighting seraphims, Agni grinned. In a three-way matchup, angels have the advantage when fighting spirits. But we aren't only spirits, are we? Runa replied. We're incarnations of the originals. Agni rolled his eyes, pointing at the orb. So are they, idiot. What did you call me? You want to fight? Seal cleared her throat, ending their bickering. Just the sound of her voice was enough to straighten them up and make them stop. I'll leave you for now. I have somewhere else to go, she said, vanishing again. Quietly, without revealing where she went. Now then, Ramirez began. Please take care of Gracia-chan and Pico-chan. I'll face Dino-kun. Of course, Ramirez-sama. Leave it to us. Dino and the two female angels continued walking through the labyrinth. I know we're going in the right direction, but... Gracia muttered. It feels like the place just won't end, Pico replied with a frown. Of course it doesn't, Dino sighed, dragging his feet. Ramirez is probably watching our every step inside her domain, after all. Then, Dino took one step forward, and the entire area shifted. Wah, hey, you two, be careful. He turned around, but the other two angels were gone. Damn it, he muttered, biting his lip. They'd been separated. He had no doubt this was Ramirez's doing. Dino-kun. A voice echoed through one of the passages in the large room he'd been transported to. Walking through with confident steps and calm elegance was the Spirit Queen, Ramirez, appearing in her full-powered adult form. Hey, Ramirez, Dino said, his voice slightly strained. He wasn't afraid, just overwhelmed with mixed emotions at facing an old friend. Sorry, but, could you sleep for a bit for me? I'll wake you up after everything is over. Ramirez's expression dropped, a touch of sadness showing before she frowned. You're acting weird. Dino, you're being controlled, aren't you? Dino blinked. Controlled? If that were the case, wouldn't he at least feel something? I doubt it, he replied, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Ramirez crossed her arms and looked straight at him. Then, can you even imagine going against the person you're working with right now? Dino straightened up. Full-powered Ramirez wasn't someone he could afford to lower his guard against. He pushed aside any thoughts of the other two for the moment. He did as she asked. He tried thinking about turning on Feld. ... Exclamation mark. His eyes widened slightly. From your expression, you noticed it too, Ramirez said, letting out a soft sigh of relief. At the very least, she now knew he wasn't willing, deep down, to actually assassinate her. Dino sighed heavily, frustration etched across his face. Quote. I'm sorry for being dumb, Ramirez. Can you help me? Of course, Ramirez said with a bright smile, clapping her hands together. I'll set you free as quickly as I can. Then, in a blur of motion, Dino swung both his swords at her. Both of them were caught off guard by the sudden attack. TCH. Dino clicked his tongue. His body was moving on its own, he was losing control. Looks like I wasn't trusted at all, he growled, gripping both blades tightly as he stared at Ramirez, who had blocked the strike with her own power. Don't worry, Ramirez said calmly as her body began to glow. The aura she radiated was dense, even for someone like Dino. I can easily handle this problem. Dino felt an imaginary bead of sweat drip down his entire body. He was unbelievably lucky he'd managed to make it clear he was being controlled. If Ramirez hadn't caught that, if she thought he was really trying to kill her, he wasn't sure what would have happened. Continental eruption. Agni grinned, swinging his axe down at Gracia. She raised her shield, bracing herself as the weapon crashed against it with a thunderous impact. The sheer force of the strike sent her skidding backward several meters, boots grinding against the scorched stone. I've heard about you, Gracia said, raising her longsword and shield once more, her sharp eyes scanning the figure before her. A former spirit lord who became the successor to the original elemental spirits. Agni rested his axe on his shoulder with a smirk. He had just finished eradicating the last of the persistent snakes in the Citadel's previous battle. Now, he stood face to face with one of the original angels, and he was gaining the upper hand. I am honored, he roared, tightening his grip and dashing forward. His axe cleaved through the air in a blazing arc. Steel clashed against steel as the two exchanged blows. Agni's mythical axe, Eruption, met the power of Gracia's unnamed mythical grade longsword and shield. Sparks danced in the air with each collision. The floor beneath them trembled with every strike, unable to keep up with the raw force being exchanged. Each blow carried enough power to obliterate a weaker monster into nothing, yet they traded them with ease. The air quickly thickened with heat. The battlefield grew hotter with each moment, flames seeping the edges of the stone floor. Agni, with each swing of his axe, unleashed torrents of flame, scorching the area. Gracia, sweat trailing down her cheek, blocked and evaded as best she could, her focus razor sharp, though the collateral damage spread rapidly around them. She clicked her tongue in frustration. Even at full power, with her wings fully unfurled and a radiant magical aura emanating from her body, she was losing ground. Agni now donned his battle form, a garb of red, burning garments that shimmered with molten heat. The very temperature of the battlefield climbed by degrees. Were it not for the labyrinth's masterful construction by the Spirit Queen herself, the floor and walls would have melted away long ago. Even so, the signs of destruction were evident. Chunks of heated rock and cobblestone filled the air, on the verge of turning to magma. On a different floor, the contrast was stark. The entire area shimmered with a biting chill. Ice covered every surface, and each breath Pico exhaled turned instantly to fog. Her grip tightened on her spear as she stood ready. Across from her, Runa loosed another arrow from her bow. Frostbite, she whispered, releasing the deadly projectile. Pico's eyes narrowed. With a swift motion, she swept her spear sideways, slicing through the arrow mid-flight. It shattered into countless frozen fragments. Yet Runa remained calm, even amused. The tiny shards dispersed across the floor, embedding themselves in the environment. Wherever they landed, they spread their icy trait, freezing whatever they touched. You two are strong fighters, Pico said, grimacing as she charged forward. Her spear thrust aimed straight at Runa's heart. I'd have preferred not to fight you. Runa smiled faintly. You can always join our side. I wish I could, Pico replied under her breath as their weapons met in another clash of frost and fury. Runa's raiment of ice gleamed, shielding her from Pico's attacks. Meanwhile, Pico channeled all her strength just to fend off the unnatural cold, the kind that seemed to devour heat itself. All around them, the floor and walls grew encased in ice and snow. Cracks spread from the crevices, jagged and unnatural, as frozen particles burrowed deeper into the structure. Pico bit her lip, her breath short. One slip, one moment of hesitation, and she'd be overwhelmed. The ice Runa wielded wasn't just powerful, it was terrifying. It reminded Pico of the true dragon Velzard. Though, it was only her own opinion of her opponent. Meanwhile, as the battle raged on within the labyrinth between the fallen seraphim and the original elemental spirits, Rimuru stood on the border between Jura and Dworgen. Before him stretched a corps of tens of thousands, of soldiers clad in armor. "Hello, Rimuru-san," Yuki called, stepping forward from the cautious crowd, waving casually. "What do you think? Not bad for such a short amount of time, huh?" Velgrin stood beside Rimuru, arms crossed, an expression unreadable. Her eyes scanned the crowd. Over 1,000 other worlders were among them, an impressive feat. Though Yuki was an ally, even she was surprised he'd convinced so many to turn their backs on the Empire. "Are they all okay with this?" Rimuru asked, his gaze shifting to the uneasy faces in the front rows. They avoided eye contact, heads bowed, not in respect, but in fear. Fear of the demon who now stood before them. These same warriors had once boasted they could defeat the demon of the forest with ease. Even after Yuki had explained that the demon had become an ally, many remained confident, dismissing Rimuru's strength. But now, standing in his presence, they felt the truth. He was terrifying. He was not just a demon, he was the primordial demon. Similar to Guy Crimson, Rimuru's aura pressed down, and it took everything the soldiers at the front could muster just to remain standing. Knees trembled, backs stiffened, but none dared to fall. Not out of pride, but from the fear of what would happen if they angered him. Ironically, their respect for Yuki, who could speak so casually with such a being, skyrocketed. Loyalty and faith in their leader grew stronger without him even realizing it. "They're all ready to fight for you," Yuki said with a confident grin. To be continued.